Hi, welcome to Wednesday Wisdom. My name is Sera Doğramacı. I'm IHA's Goaltender Development Manager. Today with me, I have Steve Thompson, who is the ADM Manager for Goaltending at USA Hockey. Hi, Steve.
How are you doing today? I guess
Excellent. How
it's
are
the
you?
morning for you and it's the night for us.
Yeah, coordinating time zone's been fun. Everyone
Yeah.
changing at different times. All right, I'm going to go straight into it. How did
Sure.
you get involved in hockey?
So I had a pretty different route than most in the United States in the sense that my parents never played hockey, and my dad was in the Air Force, and we got stationed in Alaska, which was a big hockey community, but my mom and dad grew up in Ohio, which is more football and
Yeah.
wrestling and everything other than hockey. And so when I was about 9 years old, my dad got free tickets to the local pro team, and he was kind of like, "You want to go check this hockey thing out?" And so we went to the arena, and I was just obsessed with the goalie from day one. The goalie had the cool gear on and happened to play really well that night. I think it was probably the first start of the night, and I was just gravitated towards the net, and I was like, I want to be that guy. I don't know how or what to do, but I want to do what that guy's doing. So pretty rare here where I didn't start even playing hockey till I was about 10, and I only played goal. Like I wanted to be a goalie from the minute I learned about hockey, and that's I don't think
Wow.
I don't think I've ever scored a legit goal in my career. I mean, I never even started as a forward for even a game. I was like, I want to be goalie. That's who I want to be. And so
Wow.
so
Okay. So then I'm age 10, straight into goalie.
yeah.
Did you learn any sort of I guess player skills at all, like skating? Was anything, I guess, affected by just being straight as a goalie?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely wouldn't recommend doing what I did. It's everything we're seeing so far is about build the athlete first and then specialize afterward. And, you know, 20, 30 years ago, however long ago it was now, that wasn't a thing. And my parents didn't know any better. They just were like, whatever you
Yeah.
want to do, you know? And so I would never recommend that. And I do think it limited my options as I got older. I didn't read the game very well. I wasn't the best at anticipating where plays were going. And I think a lot of that had to do with the fact that I only played goal. I never got to live life in the eyes of the forward and defenseman, which I think would have
Mm.
given me a richer knowledge of the game at large. But I was obsessed with the position, and I trained harder than anybody I knew because I loved it so much. So I think I was able to skip some steps just due to how much I was obsessed with goaltending. But probably big picture, if I could change it, I would have definitely played more positions and more sports before I decided, you know what, hockey's my thing.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, we can talk about that a little bit later with what USA Hockey's kind of, I guess, encouraging with that approach. But in Alaska, did you get any specific goalie coaching as a youth?
Not really. There wasn't a whole lot of coaching back then. We had like a Saturday clinic that all the goalies would attend, but it wasn't. It was ran by someone who had great intentions. But now that I, knowing what I know now, it was awesome in the sense that we all loved it, and it was like the best part of the week, and we all got to celebrate being a goalie. But the training was a little abstract. But I think there's probably a good message in that, and that you don't have to have this world-class sheet of ice. The goalie coaching, to really develop a passion for the position, which probably motivates kids more than even if you have the best coach in the world that isn't, motivating you to want to be there. So there was not a goalie coach per se, but they gave us a window once a week to kind of work on our skills.
I think there's also another lesson in that with the roles that we hold, drawing from our past experiences, is what can we do that maybe we didn't have back then or could be improved on what we had back then. So, if you didn't have that experience, then how would you know if it was good or bad or what you can do now, right? Okay, so then from there, what did your goalie career look like?
Yeah, so I played in Alaska until I was about 16, and then started trying out for some junior programs. And through that process, moved to Detroit and played in Michigan for a season. Went to British Columbia for a season, Iowa for 2 seasons before then going to university. So I was kind of bouncing around in the junior ranks a bit, and then played at the University of Alaska. So that was kind of my playing career. And yeah, I mean, again, probably wouldn't recommend leaving so early if I could do it all over again, but that was the culture of the way we did things back then.
Yeah.
Uh, and I met some excellent people through it. The families I lived with when I was traveling around, I still talk to today. And, they took great care of me, and, they were, now my second, third, and fourth family. So it's kind of fun to have people all over the country that you can catch up with.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I mean, that does sound fun. Okay, so, well, what did you study at university?
Psychology.
Oh.
Yeah, so I have my bachelor's in science and psychology and actually did some undergraduate research. So I know that with your background, I was really excited to hear about everything you've been doing when, you know, rumor of
Nerd life, right?
scientific
Goalies are smart.
and other nerd goalie coach out there. I was pumped to hear about you and wished you would have been at the camp when I was there.
Well, maybe one day. Well, I'm sure we'll cross paths somewhere in the future. Okay, so then did your sort of playing career end there at university? Did you go straight into coaching? What happened beyond then?
Yeah, so I had an option to either go over to Europe and play some lower level pro and just kind of explore the world. I was going to teach English and by day as a way to make money and then play pro in France or get into coaching at the university level. And I went back and forth, but the head coach, and I'm grateful for this now, kind of said, buddy, if you're just doing it to tour Europe, start your career now and you'll make enough money that you can go over there and do it on your own time when you're not stressed about playing minutes and everything else. And was emphasizing how hard it is to get into the Division I level here in North America, and that there's an opportunity right out of college to do so, that you're crazy to pass that up. And at the time I was immature and I was like, this sounds like a bad idea, but I did it anyway. And now looking back, I couldn't be more grateful. I have so many friends that did go and play for a couple of years and saw some cool things, but are now so many flights behind if they did try to get into coaching. Just because if that window is not open, you never know when the next coach is out and when there's an opening. And there's just so many variables.
Yeah, it would take opportunities as they come, right? You never know what's going to happen. Okay, so coaching life, talk us through. What have you done? What's been cool?
Yeah. Started at the university level, and in Alaska where I coached, it was a smaller university that didn't have a lot of funding, and so I was able to wear a lot of hats, which ended up being a really good move.
Mm-hmm.
Time I thought I was being overworked, and I was like, oh my gosh, I was the strength coach for the team, I was the video operations, I was doing all the hotels and booking everything, and I had like 8 different hats on. At most universities there's somebody that would have each one of those roles, but we just didn't have the capacity to do that. And at the time I was kind of frustrated because I felt like I couldn't give any one of those jobs all my effort that I wanted to. But as my career progressed, knowing enough about each one of those roles became very helpful in some other situations that came up. So that's kind of how I started, and then transitioned and had the opportunity to work for the Pittsburgh Penguins organization for a year. And that was really where, my career kind of took off. So the guy that I worked for ended up becoming the Penguins head goalie coach and won 2 Stanley Cups right back to back, and was climbing the ladder quickly, and I was kind of his understudy. And so he didn't have the time to kind of preach the word to the people that were so curious about what was going on, in his mind. But I did have the time. So I was kind of going around and sharing with people what Mike was doing. And that's kind of what connected some, bridges for myself. And
That's awesome.
led to some USA hockey opportunities. So.
Nice. Well, I think it, and even in Alaska, just wearing those different hats, like you draw upon all those experiences, right? And it helps you, I guess you get a greater appreciation for what individual people do in their roles. And then when you start planning things, you take all that into account as well, right?
Yeah. I mean, you learn so much, and, it's a challenging time though. I'm sure for many that are trying to figure out their career, trying to figure out, do I want to be a full-time strength coach? I really like the gym. Do I want to be a full-time video person? That's a great way to get to the NHL if you played the game. Do you want to stick with goaltending because that's what you did? But it's a much harder ladder to climb because there's only a few positions, and many people that played in the NHL will have a better chance at getting your job if you didn't play in the NHL. And so there's just so, or do you even want to be a team coach and then become an assistant or head coach? So there's so many different decisions, and it's challenging at the time, but kind of fun to look back on how you navigated all those waters.
Yeah, well, I'm sure you're grateful for it. It sounds like you're very appreciative of all the opportunities you have had. Okay, straight into USA hockey then, or were there other things happening as well?
Yeah, so I ended up from that role with Pittsburgh, took over for the West Coast of USA Hockey, and was kind of overseeing 6 different states, similar to the role I'm doing now, but just was the West Coast at the time.
Yeah.
So I moved back to Alaska and oversaw that West Coast of the country, started Alaska Goaltending Academy, which was a youth hockey, well, I guess it was everything. We worked with adult hockey, youth hockey. I was coaching the college team again. So it was just kind of a cool group for goalies to get together and train and work. And so that's kind of what was paying the bills. And it was a lot of fun building that community in Alaska. And so that's when I had the chance to come to Australia. I was not in the position I'm in currently. I was overseeing the West Coast, but Phil, who has had my role at the time, couldn't go to Australia and recommended that I fill his space. So that led to, you know, some really cool opportunities coming to Australia. I'd never been there before and got to meet all the cool people down there, and learned so much about that, and had the chance to go to Romania and do something similar, and Finland. So yeah, it's kind of led to some world travel, which I never would have
guessed. Well, right. That's really cool. Okay, talk us about Australia. I mean, we didn't meet when you came down. What were your impressions? I mean, you were at one of our better rinks across the country. What did you think? How are our goalies? What are our coaches like? What were your first impressions?
Yeah, I mean, I was shocked at how similar it was. You know, I never knew, but I just assumed. I'd never thought of hockey in Australia before. When you watch the Olympics, you usually think Summer Olympics when you think Australia. So, you know, I was so curious as to what it was going to be like. But, you know, the kids were hockey players and the coaches were hockey coaches. And it was just like, it just seemed like, you know, another state in the United States. So was pleasantly surprised by the level of play. But I was most impressed with the adversity the kids faced and didn't care about. Like the ice, it was pretty hot. It was, you know, late January, and the ice like started to puddle up and the pucks would get stuck. And I just know here, if that ever happened at a rink, like our kids would be quitting and crying and they'd be such babies about it. And to see all the athletes like just put their nose down and work hard and keep going, and never once heard them complain about the ice, I was like, can we please bring you all to the United States with me? I'd love to have people that aren't going to like complain about the conditions, or, you know, none of the parents made anything about it. In America, families have been jumping over the plexiglass and like fighting the rink attendants. So.
Yeah, I think we're used to all sorts of things, right? So, and I think, I mean, from my perspective anyway, that's how I coach goalies. When some excuses start coming out, oh, I can't slide because the ice is rough. It's like, well, what are you going to do in the last 5 minutes of a game when you don't get an ice cut? You know, you've kind of got to work through all the conditions. So then if you do face it, you know what you need to do.
Yeah, I think it just, you know, it speaks volumes about Australia in general. Everyone knows them as an athletic powerhouse. I mean, your country has taken so much pride in sport. And so it's just cool to see some of the mental skills that your culture has created that is a little bit different than some of the things that I've seen in other countries or even my own.
Yeah. Okay, so when you were here, what sort of things did you do? I mean, I know you were the head goalie coach, but were there sort of initiatives that you were trying to get off the ground or encourage people to do, even with the coaches, some things that they should maybe think about in terms of their coaching?
Yeah, I mean, and you're speaking in Australia specifically?
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, my takeaway from my time there was just how scarce the ice is, how much more important it is that every single practice is utilized correctly for the goalies. And so I think, you know, how often do kids normally get to skate a week in the season?
Well, most would have an hour a week of team practice and then a game on a weekend. I mean, this year's been a little difficult. But in saying that, if people want more ice time, you can find ice time. There are more stick and puck sessions available that were never there 10 years ago. So if you want the ice, you can find it. But for most people, it would just be an hour a week of training.
Yeah. So, I mean, that even heightens the responsibility that the coaches have to make sure that every drill is responsible for both the forwards, defense, and the goalies. It just can't be the shooting gallery of the team practice and then go to a game. And, you know, I haven't found a country yet in the world that's done it well. I think everybody's struggling with this concept of how do we develop our forwards and defense without hanging our goalies out to dry, or conversely, if we're going to do a drill for our goalies, how do we do one that's entertaining our forwards and defense and they're not bored and wanting to leave? So it's not easy, but when you only get one sheet a week, you can't run a practice that looks nothing like a game and then anticipate that it's going to breed results in the game. So I think it just makes it a little more challenging, I think.
Yeah, and I think especially this year where people haven't had ice, it's really encouraged creativity. How do you keep people engaged? You know, Melbourne's only just got their rinks open up again. They've just come out of lockdown. Canberra's rink is still going under refurbishments as well, so they haven't had ice, you know, pretty much at all this year. But I know for us in Sydney, we've been pretty lucky. So everyone's had just different challenges to try and work through it. But on the back of that, how are things at USA Hockey this year?
Yeah, similar. We aren't allowed to travel at all for work, and so we've been doing everything remote. And some of the states have had access to ice, and if they've had low caseloads, then they haven't really been affected at all. And we have other areas that haven't had the rinks open since everything went down in March. And so it's been challenging trying to kind of help the country at large because it's so different. I mean, every state has different rules and regulations, and different caseloads, and so we get a lot of emails and questions about what to do, and we have no control over that. I think that's one of the challenges that we're now facing, is that people look to us as USA Hockey as like almost the president, where we mandate you can go to the rink or not, and we're like, no, like, we're not your health officials. We just encourage you to help your kids out as best you can, but we can't tell your rink to open up or your governor to tell.
Yeah, right. Right. So what have you been able to do then?
We've been doing a lot of Zoom teaching. We had some webinars throughout the spring where we bring on, some psychologists and some mental skills coaches and strength coaches and goalie coaches, and just provided 4 days a week with somebody that had a lot to bring to the hockey community, and they were free for everybody to watch, and they're still actually archived on YouTube.
Yeah.
And so that was one of our outs. And then we've been hosting all of our coaching education clinics, no different than we do in any other year, other than they're all been virtual through Zoom. And we've seen a lot of success with that. I mean, I don't think we've had any negative feedback. People love the ability to just be in their living room, turn on their computer, and not have to, drive however long, get a hotel, spend upwards of $1,000 for a weekend to get, a mandatory coaching certification. And also they get to chat with other coaches from across the country and recognize that, the grass isn't greener, where they anticipated, well, if I just lived in Minnesota where people love hockey, I wouldn't have this problem. And then they're in a breakout room with a Minnesota coach, and that coach is going, oh, like, if I only lived in Nevada where people didn't have rich history in hockey, I wouldn't have this problem. So.
Oh, that's awesome to hear. Well, and hopefully the way that things have been done this year sort of sets a basis for what things can happen in the future. I think we've proven that some things can be delivered online. It brings more people together. So maybe that's the way that we continue with some things. Okay, so I know you have a specific goalie coach accreditation program. We don't have one here yet. We're hoping to build one. So can you talk us a little bit through the different levels, what they entail, all that sort of thing, please?
Yeah, so we have a bronze, silver, and gold, which is, kind of our level 1, 2, and 3 for goalie coaches specifically. And our goal is that every coach in the United States, no matter what your background is, takes these courses and understands enough to help their goalies out. And so we're not designing these for people that only played in goal, that only played for a long time and are the goalie gurus on every corner. They're for mom and dad that maybe have a son or daughter that they don't feel like it's getting enough attention and they want to learn more to help, or a coach that has been coaching for a long time but never played in net and is fearful that if they give information, it's going to be the wrong information. And so we try and simplify things as best as possible and really just encourage people to get involved and make it safer for them. I think people are just kind of afraid of making the kids worse on accident. So we just really let them know, what this boils down to is caring about kids. If you care about your goalie, if you listen to the questions that they have and just communicate through them, they'll improve. You don't need to necessarily even know what you're doing. You just have to have an open heart and kind of be there for them.
Yeah, provide the support, right? Okay, so what's in the bronze level? What do you get out of it?
Yeah, so we kind of structure day one as the how-to coach section. And so there we talk about the environment you create and, empowering kids to want to play goal. How can we get more kids to try goalie? How can we have the kids that do try goalie want to come back to the net and not, want to leave? And then talk about age-appropriate programming. So depending on how old your kids are, what the recommendations are for coaching those kids. We shift from there to how-to coach skills. So we try and empower our coaches to see themselves more as teachers than coaches and really work on their explanation skills to make sure their kids, retain the information they say, their demonstration skills, so that when they see this demonstration, the kids actually live, learn and get better through it. So that's kind of day one is broken into, and then we give it a little bit of history of the USA Hockey goaltending and where we are structure-wise to support them if they do have questions. And then day two is all about the what to coach. So we go over 6 fundamentals of goaltending. We go over drill design, and then the kind of capstone of the bronze course is they actually have to come up with a goalie drill themselves based on everything learned over the day and a half.
So then as you progress through that, like if that one's, is that designed for more the parents, the player coaches, and then the silver is, okay, now this is really for goalie coaches, or what differentiates between the levels?
No, we have some NHL goalie coaches end up jumping on the bronze. And again, some of the information is so simple that they like know obviously what a T-push is, but some of the culture of coaching concepts actually become
Right.
big light bulb moments for them where they're like, holy smokes, I'm an NHL goalie coach. And I didn't even realize that
Yeah.
I'm doing a very good job of communicating and that my communication skills can get better. So there's kind of a great equalizer where we actually almost find that if you're a teacher by trade, you excel in these programs. And so it's kind of fun to see the roles switched a little bit where we'll have someone like, I'm a second grade teacher. And we're like, well, we can tell like you're an absolute weapon at communicating and encouraging kids to, work. So that's kind of the foundation to the whole thing is
Okay.
it's accessible at every level. Everyone's going to take a little nugget relative to
Yep.
either the what to coach or the how to coach, but there's going to be something in there for everybody, regardless of how long they've been playing the position or coaching the position.
Okay. So then what happens at the gold level? Let's jump right up to the top then.
Yeah, so our learning objectives outside of kind of what we've just discussed is at the end of the bronze, we want them to be able to build their own goalie drill based on the information that they've learned on age-appropriate training and drill design. The silver, it gets a little more nitty-gritty on play reading and some other elements, but that objective is to build a practice plan. So if you were to run your own goalie clinic, it gives you the tools and resources to do that. And then the gold level certification gives you access to be like a director of goaltending for your association. So it's more the 35,000 feet view of how do you structure your staffs to make sure every team in your program has coaching. How do you make sure that your association has a weekly goalie clinic that,
Right.
So it kind of starts micro with the drill, it expands to the practice, and then it expands to the whole association.
That's really awesome. Okay. Well, do you have an idea of how many people have gone through the gold program then?
Yeah, so a little funky. We've rolled out gold before, but it was prior to, this big picture of where we want to be. So we've got about 25 people that have a gold, but they didn't take a silver, nor did they take a bronze, and the curriculum was different then. So we're kind of in a predicament where we'd like to try and get those people back at some point if we can, and maybe they'll be motivated to take the bronze and silver, even though they technically have their gold, because the curriculum shifted so much since then.
Yeah.
And so we kind of see that in all coaching. Like our level 5 is our highest on the general CEP track. And we have people that took their level 5 25 years ago and don't technically have to come back to a coaching course. But as we all know, the game's evolved so much that, to be a gold or a level 5, from 1995 might end up being a bad thing for 2020.
Yeah.
Just what we now know about how to treat kids and, everything else.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I know here for the level 1s, there are definitely refreshers and, with any sort of accreditation really, that you do have to stay on top of it and is it current? So interesting. Well, it's something for us to consider when hopefully we start rolling this out. Okay, so with your role, because it is American development model, so if we're focusing on development, do you have anything to do with the national teams?
Yeah, not as much as coaching. I was the women's national team goalie coach at one point, which was more hands-on with those athletes, but now it's more big picture stuff. So it's less about working with the athletes themselves and more about what do we feel like the curriculum should be for our world-class goalies, and what can we do to make our country's best the world's best. And so have some responsibility in selecting which goalie coaches we're going to have for those teams and which curriculum we're going to teach for those goalies, and what our brand is going to be for U.S. goaltending. If you're a goaltender on the Team USA, what does that mean? What does that feel like? What do you represent? And so those are all things that we're actually working on currently to try and build this foundation and culture where every American goalie feels kind of like the military, where what your kind of ethos is, what it means to be an American goalie. And in the previous years, it's kind of been like we just cherry pick a couple NHL Americans that have been really good and successful. They come in for a few weeks for the Olympics, and then they go back to their teams. And we want to build more of a family. We want them to be more part of the picture for a longer period of time.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, that makes sense. And again, something we're trying to build here as well. I know our situation is vastly different to what you have with your national teams, but I think just the sense of family and community, and obviously we don't have as much depth in being able to select teams, and we're still trying to get goalie coaches on every team, but that's a lot, not so much a long-term objective, but within the next 5 years type thing. So we'll get there eventually, I'm sure, with help from you. I so what else is looking like for the future? If hopefully once we're through the pandemic, what are things looking like for goalies in the USA?
It's been really positive. I mean, the company fully supports goaltending. They've been really good about giving us as many resources as we need to do our job. And we have a former president of USA Hockey who was a former goalie who's really been spearheading this and helping me. I'm kind of the operations guy and I have the ideas for what we need to get done. And then he's been really good about making it happen. And so we've been kind of teaming up, and I feel confident, but there's also, just as you probably recognize in Australia, it's such a culture shock.
Yeah.
And we really are having a hard time getting coaches to take the goaltending coaching seriously. And so we don't mandate it currently that they have to take these coaching education courses that are devoted to goalies. Mm-hmm. And we have, a decent turnout, but nothing of this widespread vision of we'd like it where every coach recognizes that, hey, I coach the team, and that means I coach all the athletes, not just the ones in the gear that looks familiar to me. And so we've got a lot of work to do, and we're trying to navigate those waters appropriately of, is it okay to mandate it? Is it not okay to mandate it? If we don't mandate it, how do we incentivize them to come? It's going to be a challenge, but I'm hopeful that, in 10 years we look back on this and we laugh and think it was crazy that we ever had this problem in the first place, and that the whole culture has shifted where everyone assumes responsibility for every athlete on the team.
Yeah, and yeah, it is the same thing here that we do. We roll in a goalie coaching component into our level 1 player coaches certification, just so they have a little bit of an idea, because like you said, and I'm sure this is where we get it from, that if you're the head coach of a team, the goalie's on your team, you're also the head coach of a goalie. So you need to look after them, you need to support them, and they're not just there for target practice. So we did at our recent coaching symposium, we did have a section on drill design, and we had Don, he was leading that session with, what are you actually thinking about with your drills? If you're giving key teaching points to your players, what are your key teaching points to your goalies? It's little things like that to try and just get the head coaches thinking a little bit more.
That's awesome. Well, I guess one thing I would share is that one thing we've done with the new curriculum is we've completely taken away the goalie segregated section. So for years it was, you had your block on this, your block on that, and then it was the goaltending hour. And that was when you get hit with a flood of information on goaltending. And we've completely removed that. And now we've just integrated goalie concepts into whatever the window is. So if we're talking about practice design, now in that curriculum, there's a section that talks about what that means for your goalies. If there's a section on fundamentals, then that's where the fundamentals of goaltending would go in. But we're trying our best to not segregate it so that it seems more like, hey, this isn't a separate section that you can just tune out for because you didn't play goal. Or this isn't a separate segment where you're going to call the person on your staff that did play a goal to come and listen to while you check Twitter. And that was kind of previously what we were seeing, is that's when everyone kind of took their break if they didn't see themselves as the goalie person on staff.
Gosh, that sounds awesome. What's the feedback been on that so far?
It's been good. We have some people that feel like in our goalie community that we've done a disservice to goaltending by removing that specific hour, and that they don't feel like they feel like we worked really hard for a long time to get that block. And now by removing it, we're kind of losing our steam. But I think big picture, what we're find is just that the more integrated we can be, the better it's going to be for goaltending in the future. And so now what we're trying to do is just make sure that every instructor does make sure to hit on those points, because that is one of the challenges we now have, is if the instructor themselves doesn't feel very comfortable talking about goaltending, sometimes they just go through that block of instruction and negate the goalie piece. And so I think that's where we're seeing a little bit of feedback on, hey, like I took this course and we didn't talk about goaltending at all. And we're like, what do you mean? Like there's all these
you
points
did every section, right? Oh, that's, I mean, it, lack of a better term, to normalize it, right?
So we're trying to, record sessions of coaches that do a good job including it, and then we're trying to share out the coach developer team to say, if you know nothing at all, just parrot what this guy said at this point in time, and then you can get a couple pointers in and hopefully spark some dialogue. But the bright side about all this is, there's 50 coaches on every one of these classes, and generally there's at least one person there that is a goalie person.
Mm-hmm.
And so once that conversation gets started, there's some people in the crowd that can kind of carry the weight, even if this instructor themselves doesn't feel comfortable.
Awesome. That sounds really cool. All right. Thank you so much for this chat, Steve. I love that we have a close connection between our associations. So, who better in the world to sort of get guidance from, right? And I know there's things that we want to roll out and things that you are still rolling out and things to come in the future. And I'm really looking forward to continuing to working this partnership and see what's going to happen in the future for the global hockey community.
Yeah, I think we've got a bright future. I'm excited for it.
Excellent. Thanks so much again.
Thank you.